Imagine you built a house. Every brick, every nail, every window, you placed it yourself. You spent centuries building it. You bled for it. You fought wars for it. And then one day, your tenant kicks you out, moves in permanently, and turns your house into the most powerful address on the planet. That's not a metaphor. That's exactly what happened between the British Empire and the United States of America. And the most insane part, Britain did it to themselves, every single step of the way. This is the story of the greatest empire the world has ever seen, how it rose, how it ruled, and how it accidentally built the one thing that would destroy it. Let's go back to a damp, foggy island sitting on the edge of Europe. No massive army, no vast land, no natural resources worth bragging about. By every measure, Britain should have been nobody, a footnote, a cold, rainy afterthought on the map of history. But Britain figured something out that nobody else had. Control the water, and you control the world. The ocean in the 1600s was what the internet is today. It was how money moved, how goods moved, how power moved. And Britain, sitting right on the Atlantic, decided to build the most terrifying navy the world had ever seen. The Royal Navy wasn't just a military force. It was a business strategy, and business was very, very good. By the 1700s, Britain had a secret weapon that makes modern corporations look like lemonade stands. It was called the East India Company, and it wasn't just a trading business. It had its own government, its own courts, its own currency, and its own private army of 260,000 soldiers, twice the size of the actual British Army. The world's first megacorporation and an answer to almost nobody. Then came the war that changed everything. Most people have never heard of it, but historians call it World War Zero. The 7 Years' War, 1756. Britain versus France and Spain simultaneously across 5 continents. And Britain won. Completely, devastatingly. They kicked France out of North America. They kicked France out of India. In one war, Britain went from powerful island to global superpower. But here's what nobody told you about that victory. It was the single biggest mistake Britain ever made. Because when Britain defeated France in North America, they removed the one thing keeping the American colonies loyal: fear. The 13 colonies had been terrified of the French on their border. They needed British soldiers. They needed British protection. But the moment France was gone, the Americans looked around and thought something very dangerous. Wait, why do we need Britain anymore? And it got worse, because Britain, looking at their massive war bill, decided the colonies should help pay for it. New taxes, new rules, new restrictions, and the Americans, who had been trained by decades of British law to believe in the rights of Englishmen, used Britain's own legal logic to argue that taxing them without representation was in fact deeply un-British. The American Revolution wasn't a rebellion against British values. It was a rebellion using British values. Britain had handed their colonies the exact philosophical weapon needed to dismantle them. But even that wasn't the most ironic part. At its peak, the British Empire was something no human brain can fully comprehend. By 1920, it covered 13.7 million square miles, 24% of all land on Earth. Nearly 1 in every 4 human beings alive answered to the British Crown. You could travel from Canada to Australia to India to South Africa, all without leaving British territory. The sun genuinely never set on it. Not poetically, literally. There was always a piece of British land in sunlight somewhere on the planet. And the jewel at the center of it all? India. India paid the taxes. India supplied the soldiers. India was the reason the entire empire made sense. Every trade route, every naval base, every faraway colony, it all existed to protect the road to India. Here's a fact that sounds fake but is completely real. In the 1700s, the tiny Caribbean island of Barbados, a speck on the map, was considered more valuable to the British Crown than all 13 American colonies combined. Because of sugar, one island's sugar plantations generated more wealth than an entire continent of settlers. Power is strange. Then came the war, the first one. World War I hit Britain like a freight train made of debt. They won, technically, but winning cost them £35 billion. And to pay for it, they had to borrow from someone. Someone new, someone powerful, someone who'd been quietly getting rich while Europe tore itself apart. America. For the first time in history, money started flowing west instead of east. The financial center of the world began its slow migration from London to New York. Britain didn't notice. Or maybe they did notice and just couldn't stop it. Because on paper, after World War I, the empire actually got bigger. They absorbed former German and Ottoman territories. Maps turned even more pink. Speeches were made, flags were planted. But it was empty, like a company reporting record revenues the same quarter it maxed out every credit card. The empire was the largest it had ever been, and completely, silently, catastrophically broke. And then came the Second War. Hitler's army is tearing through Europe. Britain is standing almost entirely alone. And Churchill, the great lion of Britain, has to do something that no history textbook quite captures the humiliation of. He has to beg. He calls President Roosevelt and asks for 50 destroyers. Old ones, rusting, barely functional WW1-era ships. And Roosevelt says yes, but there's a price. The United States wants 99-year leases on British naval bases across the entire Western Hemisphere. Bermuda, the Bahamas, Jamaica, strategic locations Britain had spent centuries building. Churchill agreed. He had no choice. But even that wasn't the most devastating transaction. In 1940, Britain secretly loaded its entire national gold reserve onto ships, every last bar. They sent it across the Atlantic to Canada and America to pay for weapons. The operation was called Operation Fish. The British public had no idea. The gold disappeared into a building in Montreal, guarded by machine guns around the clock, and the greatest empire on Earth quietly pawned its savings to survive. Then came Lend-Lease. Americans learned about this in school as America's generous aid to Britain. What they didn't learn is what it actually cost. America didn't give Britain anything. They forced Britain to sell off its overseas companies, liquidate its foreign assets, and hand over the most powerful financial crown in the world, reserve currency status. The British pound sterling had been the global currency for over a century. Every international trade, every deal, every debt was settled in pounds. Lend-Lease ended that. The pound died so the dollar could live. Britain only finished paying off its WWI debt to America on December 31st, 2006. Your parents were alive when Britain made its final payment for a war that ended in 1945. And then the dominoes fell. Fast. India, 1947. The jewel. Gone. Gandhi's movement combined with Britain's empty treasury made holding India impossible. And the moment India left, the entire logic of the empire collapsed. Every trade route, every naval base, every far-flung colony, it all existed to protect the road to India. Without India, what exactly was the point? The answer was nothing. Colony by colony, the empire evaporated. But the final humiliation came in 1956. Egypt, under its bold new leader Gamal Abdel Nasser, nationalized the Suez Canal, the critical waterway Britain and France considered their property. Britain was furious. They launched the military operation to take it back. And then the phone rang. President Eisenhower called London and delivered a message so brutal it barely sounds real. If Britain didn't withdraw immediately, the United States would collapse the British pound on the open market. Economically, deliberately, like crushing a bug. Britain withdrew. The whole world watched, and the whole world understood. Britain was no longer a superpower. There was a new sheriff, and it wasn't wearing a red coat. Here's the part that should genuinely keep you up at night. Britain educated the men who destroyed it. Gandhi, trained in London law schools. Nehru, London. Lee Kuan Yew, who built Singapore and dismantled British colonial power in Asia, London. Britain took the brightest minds from its colonies, taught them British concepts of liberty, justice, and self-determination, and sent them home. Those men used everything Britain taught them to end the British Empire. And when the naval empire finally fell, America didn't even have to build its own infrastructure. Britain had spent centuries constructing ports, coaling stations, and naval routes across the entire globe. When the empire vanished, the United States Navy simply sailed in and took over the same routes, same roads, new driver. The world didn't become free when the British Empire fell. It just changed management. Today, the British Empire exists as a ghost, the Commonwealth, 56 nations, symbolic cooperation, no real power. The English language is the reason Hollywood dominates Earth and the reason you're watching this video. Every international flight, every scientific paper, every business deal conducted in the language of a damp island that peaked 200 years ago. And America? The nation Britain accidentally created, philosophically armed, financially drained, and strategically enabled, became the most powerful country in human history. Now with redcoats and cannons, with dollars and debt, the empire didn't just vanish, it transformed. It shed its physical skin and put on a financial suit. And it's been running the world ever since, just with an American accent. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and we will meet in the next video.